I've always thought discipline was about waking up early, putting the hard work in, pushing through when things get tough. And in part, yes, those things are super important. But I've recently realized that it's much deeper than just pushing through with all you've got. Let me explain. About 2 or 3 years back, I started really trying to get my life in order. 5 a.m. wake ups, meditation, going for walks before the sun even came up. You name it, I did it. Oh, ice baths as well. Very difficult, but very rewarding. Anyways, I did this for about 2, 3 weeks straight, every single day. Wake up 5 a.m., take a cold shower, go for a walk, hit the gym, right? This was my morning routine. But eventually, I slipped. I started hitting snooze. I started skipping walks. I started rushing meditation. Despite the fact that I knew these things were so crucial for my development, for me getting my life in order, so to speak, I really struggled. Every day felt like an uphill battle with the wind pushing me back down. When it came to getting out of bed, when it came to stepping outside and going for that walk, everything was so challenging. Deep down, I knew I could just push through. I could be like David Goggins and just put the hard work in day after day after day. So for another 2 weeks, I did my very best to do exactly that. But again, I slipped. I slept in. I skipped my walks. Rushed through the meditation sessions. Why was it that I could be so consistent for 6, 7, 10 days, but then suddenly just fall off? What was happening in my mind? Then one day, everything changed. All of a sudden, I had this shift in my perception when it came to going about discipline. The hustle bros of YouTube were all about getting up early, taking cold showers, meditating, hitting the gym, doing deep work before 8, 9 a.m. And while I obviously don't disagree because I did those things and still do those things, I've now realized that in order to maintain discipline in the long term, that approach is unsustainable. Isaac Newton once said, "For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction." This is his third law of motion that he found way back in the 1600s, I believe it was. And of course, this law applies to physics and how our 3D reality works, but it applies to so much more, including discipline. Think about it. If Newton's law says that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, then this also applies to your discipline. So let's say all those days you wake up at 5 a.m., you push through a workout, you take a cold shower, you meditate, and you do an hour or two of deep work all before 9 a.m. This is great, but unless you are properly rested, unless you are properly fueled, and unless you're in the proper mindset, then you're going to crash and burn. And even if you are feeling your body, getting enough rest in the proper mind state, then eventually the pendulum will swing back no matter what. This is the whole idea of rhythm. Things swing one way and then they come back to the other. It's an unbendable law of reality. It's an unbendable law of the universe. This is why, for example, many athletes, by the end of the season, they're tired, they're worn down, their bodies are essentially crumbling underneath them because for the last 5, 6, 7 months, they've been playing every single day. They need rest. To take things even further, we must consider Baumeister's ego depletion theory. This is the idea that self-control is a finite resource. Nobody can continue to keep pushing on and on and on without burning out. You found that the more you push through, the faster you diminish your self-discipline. This is exactly why discipline based on brute force, especially in the long term, is not a smart idea. Now, don't get me wrong, and this is a major caveat I'm making here. Discipline in the short term is awesome. For the sprints, for the 2 to 3 week periods of time where you're putting your nose to the grindstone and you're just working your ass off. I get it. But the thing is, as we know, continuing to push forward creates this internal friction, this resistance. And when there's internal friction or resistance, then we can no longer do the things we need to do to be disciplined. I want you to consider this idea. What if discipline isn't a trait, but a byproduct of communing with your body's natural rhythm instead of forcing it? Would you maintain discipline over longer periods of time? Would you get more work done? Let's talk about it. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. That is a quote from the Kabbalion, which is a Hermetic text I strongly recommend anybody who's into this stuff check out. Ever since reading the Kabbalion, I've become interested in energies, frequencies, vibration, and all that woo-woo stuff that you might think is a bunch of bullshit. Now, I'm not gonna lie. Some of it is a bit out there, but you can't deny this. Your body's energy fluctuates throughout the day, and so does your mental clarity. What I found is that when I lean into my body's natural rhythm instead of forcing things, trying to be overly disciplined, then life itself becomes a whole lot better. Your habits become ritualistic. Your stressors become exciting. Your actions become smoother. And as a result, being disciplined happens naturally. As I mentioned before, it's a byproduct. And this, to me, once I realized this, changed the game. When you commune with your body, when you work with your body's natural rhythm, discipline is seamless. It's smooth, like a dancer gliding across the floor, as opposed to maybe a bodybuilder who's stumbling and stepping hard with every step he takes, all right? Very different. The dancer goes with the flow. There's a natural rhythm. That's how it must be when you're embodying discipline. Most people view discipline as something that they have to push themselves through, that they have to force all their energy, all their physical actions towards doing this thing. And while, as I mentioned before, and this is another caveat, yeah, that part is important. But let me ask you this. What if you instead approach discipline like a creative ritual, like a game, instead of a battle? Here's how I have made the shift from feeling pressure to get things done in a disciplined manner to having fun with it and still getting the same things done in the same amount of time or even shorter. Step number 1 is naming the identity. You can say it out loud. You can write it down. You can look at yourself in the mirror and say these affirmations. Whatever, okay? Of course you find the approach that works for you, but the reason why I say naming the identity of the disciplined person you're trying to become is because identities are stickier than your habits and your actions. When you identify with that disciplined person, you're not forcing action. It doesn't seem like you're pressuring yourself into doing these things because that is just who you are. You are a disciplined person as opposed to forcing yourself to doing the actions of a person who is disciplined, okay? It's a slight mental tweak in your perception, but trust me, this does work. A few things you could say to yourself would be, I'm someone who honors clarity and focus through morning movement. I'm someone who gets things done from a place of alignment, not a place of anxiety. I'm someone who checks in with myself before checking my phone. You can come up with your own statement, but these are just some of mine that I have created, some of mine that I have begun identifying with in these last couple of years. Okay? So, step number 2 is setting your scene for discipline. So, a few years back, when I was waking up at 5 a.m., taking the cold showers and the ice baths, and first beginning to meditate, I tried to over optimize every aspect of my life. So, not only was it my morning routine, but it was what I listened to on the way to work. It was how I spent my lunch break at work. It was how quickly I could get through a workout in the gym. It was everything having to do with my diet. It was getting out of conversations with other people quickly so I could get to bed sooner, so I could make more use of my time the next morning. My entire life became this science project, and quite honestly, it sucked because I was trying to over optimize all areas of my life. And the thing is, if a meeting ran late, or if I took too long of a shower, or if there was traffic, or if I took too long at the gym, I would get so frustrated because this messed my predefined schedule. And I was so rigid that when things didn't go right, I became upset. And I would take things that the next step the very next morning. I would wake up at 4 a.m. or 4:30 trying to make up for the time I lost. The reason I tell you to set the scene and to make your actions sacred, not forced, is because the truth is life will never go your way. Things happen at random. Just a few minutes ago, these kids came into my video. I was in flow, all was going well. But they pulled up, they talked to me for about 5 minutes, and now here I am trying to recover. A shift I've made in these last 6 to 8 months is going from having rigid routines to realistic rituals. I've made the mornings sacred. I have made them a deliberate, intentional, and methodical process that I go through before getting into my deep work sessions. Instead of rushing through them, trying to do X, Y, and Z with a small allotted time, I'm thinking, okay, even if I don't get 2 full hours of deep work in, at least I'm doing everything leading up to the deep work. At least I am taking my shower, going for a walk, I'm doing my meditation, drinking water, etc., etc. All these things before the act of discipline. This way, even if, as I said, I don't get to do 2 full hours of deep work because I have some other obligation, I'm not so rigidly boxed in. I have engaged in the ritual I've set out to do. I have been fully present, and I've intentionally gone from one thing to the next. And this to me is much more enjoyable and, interestingly, much more flexible because you don't feel forced or rushed to get all these things done. When you act automatically, you disconnect from purpose. When you act intentionally, your actions feel sacred. Figure out your pre-work rituals, the things you do before your discipline, okay? Once you do this, it'll make getting things done when you do have the time to be disciplined so much easier, all right? And you won't feel this after 5, 10, or 15 days. You won't feel this sense of dread or this drop in energy and this sudden decline in your performance, okay? So that's step number 2. Step number 3 is honor your rhythm. As I mentioned before, a couple years back, I started waking up at 5 a.m. This was such a shock to my system because I'd been used to staying up till 11, 12 at night, waking up at 6:37. So getting up 2 hours earlier wasn't a good idea. If I could go back in time, I would have gradually shifted the time I went to bed and the time I woke up. I strongly recommend you do the same with whatever habits you have. Maybe you're somebody who can get more done in the evening. Maybe you're somebody who has the time and the flexibility to get things done midday. I don't know your life situation, but the main thing is you need to understand at what periods throughout the day you have the most energy and when you have the most mental clarity. Once you know these things, you can make changes from there. So, to wrap things up, I'm all for pushing forward and getting things done. You need to, all right? Boldly taking action and persisting even when you don't feel like it is crucial. But just know that if you continue to do this without taking a step back and reflecting on how you're going about your days, you're going to burn out. You will feel tired. You will lose that sense of mental clarity that you once had when you started this period of discipline. Okay? That's why I suggest this approach, because it's long-term, it's sustainable, and if you follow these steps, you'll avoid the seemingly inevitable crash that most people face. This approach to discipline is about communing with your body, about building relationships with your mind, body, and spirit. Finding out, okay, how can I be the most disciplined without ruining my life, essentially, without destroying my health, without making me stray away from why I wanted to be disciplined in the first place. Just to review those 3 steps: name the identity of the person you're becoming, set the scene to make your actions sacred, not forced, honor your body's rhythm. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. This was a fun one for me to make. It's a bit of a contrarian perspective because I know most people in the hustle bro space online, in the entrepreneurship space, in the self-improvement space are all about grinding, working hard, pushing forward. Yeah, that's important, but as we know, with Newton's law, with Baumeister's law, with the Hermetic law of rhythm, periods of hard work and discipline will eventually lead to periods of depletion and lack of discipline. So, take with this what you like. Be sure to comment below, like, subscribe, share this with somebody who you think is maybe working too hard without having an understanding of rest and how they can better go about getting more work done without burning out. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.